Morning rounds. Today, this is David Hooper, patient advocate. I'm a physician assistant. Trying to get you guys informed so you can make the best decisions for what works and plays into your part in your life. That's what it's about for me. People having all the information they can and need in order to make the best judgment to move forward for themselves and their family. So today it's about playing the odds. So the odds of numbers behind COVID versus getting the vaccine, not getting the vaccine. That's a lot of people that were going to get the vaccine have already gotten it. Now is where there's all the call them in-betweenies. The ones that are like, well, should I do it? Should I not do it? Because there's the obvious ones that are like, nope, not doing it. Not a chance. I don't want anything to do with it. I'm fine with that. That's fine too. You can be those people and that's all right. But the ones that are in between in this point, because we're at about 50%, I would say, for our adult population that have been vaccinated. Another who knows what percent that have actually had COVID. Probably maybe 20% of people that have had natural COVID. So that puts us in a decent spot. And vaccines are getting us to where we're at now. They're a huge reason as to why we're on the downturn, but it's also many other factors that play into it. So I don't want to say the vaccine is the only reason, but it is probably the biggest reason why we're making big strides compared to really the rest of the world. Because as a powerful country that we are, we've stockpiled as much of the vaccine as we need, even more than we need, and anybody that wants one at this point can get one. So we have it. Most other countries can't say that. I don't know many other countries around the world that have ample vaccinations for everybody. But there's a lot of hesitancy across the whole world too. It's not just here in America. There's a lot of countries that are even more hesitant for the vaccines than us. And now we're seeing all these resurgences at this point across the world, especially in countries like India. So, because they're more hesitant than we are. They're sitting at a far less percentage. Only about 1 to 2% of India was vaccinated. 1 to 2, that's it. So, it's taken off there. Big time, terrible, worse than it's ever been here. And that's because they never really had a vaccine rollout. And they had some natural infections a lot earlier this year, but obviously not enough to have any kind of protection. So the odds I was getting at are, what are the odds of what's going to happen to me if I get the vaccine, and what are the odds of what's going to happen to me if I get COVID? Because at this point, it's not really a if I get it. This is a pandemic. Meaning, if you don't get the vaccine, either you might have already had it, didn't even know, or B, it's a matter of time before you do get it. Because they don't just go away until a mass amount of the population have either been infected or vaccinated. So, you can play the odds either way. You want to wait and just get it and see what happens? Or do you want to not get the vaccine and hope that you're that small percentage of people that can hide between the herd immunity when we reach it and hope for the best? It's a gamble. So that's a gamble. The vaccination is a gamble. Doesn't matter which vaccination. There's risks in everything we do. That's the biggest point that is the take-home point. There's risks. There's risk in getting a vaccination of any sort. And there's risks of getting a disease of any sort, because poor outcomes can happen. And if you get a vaccination and you're that one rare person who has a bad side effect, and it's hard to say, but does that mean you would have not had a bad effect had you gotten COVID regularly? There's something that makes you that rare percentage to have a bad reaction to the vaccine. So would you and your immune system have been that person that had the rare or less rare reaction to the virus itself. Possible. There's no real research on that. But people that have systems that are kind of on tilt, immune systems, a lot of times it just takes one big spike to push them to a dangerous point. And that can be the inflammatory process from a vaccine, or it can be the inflammatory process from getting COVID. Either way, those people have systems that are not the best equipped for major hits to their system. So you got to take that into accord. But when you're talking the severe side effects, and we'll play with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine because that's, I've talked about that and that's in the news and they've reinstated it at this point. But the worst side effect you can get from that is this clotting disorder, which is a very strange clotting disorder, where you actually get clots despite the fact that your platelet count is really low, which is counterintuitive to what you would think from a medical standpoint, and hard to figure out and even harder to treat. So, but this effect, when people get it it occurs in the brain, is probably the most lethal spot for it to happen. Very rare for it to happen outside of these issues. But the numbers of that happening with the Johnson & Johnson was they said 0.4 out of 100,000 people. So that's less than you could say half of a person. Or you could up that ante and say, okay, it's 4 people out of 1 million. Or 0.4 out of 100,000. So that number's small, but it exists. Can't say it doesn't, so it's a risk. But that same condition, with that same clotting problem in natural COVID patients, occurs at a 4.5 to 20 out of 100,000 rate. So even if you take the lowest spectrum of that, 4.5, compared to 0.4, 4.5. Everybody's talking about this 0.4 out of 100,000 from the Johnson & Johnson. That was 8 people. Now, you extrapolate that, that's at minimum 10 times more frequent if you get natural COVID. So that's a risk. That's a gamble. Do you just want to play that odds and go with getting COVID naturally? And then you're looking at a 10-fold risk at getting this clotting problem. So that's where it gets kind of iffy, where people don't talk about that side of it. People don't talk about what really happens with COVID and what the probabilities of that happening. But it is 10 times at minimum more likely to get it if you had a case of moderate to severe COVID, which again, okay, say, well, that's rare in my age range. How prevalent is that for me to get a severe case? It can happen. Again, you're playing the odds. So they both come with risks. But I don't want people to think, oh, the only way I can get this weird clotting problem is if I get the vaccine. If I don't get the vaccine, I don't have the risk of getting that clot problem. That's wrong. There's a risk in both. There's a risk if you get the vaccine, and there's an even higher risk if you don't get the vaccine, because at some point you're going to get COVID, and then your risk is even higher of getting that clotting problem. Things to think about. Big things. Risky things. So that's, it's hard to really stratify, and some people's brains don't work very well as far as seeing these big risks, because you got to bring a lot of stuff in the picture to really get a good picture of what your true risks are in your family, with yourself, with your health conditions, who you hang out with, your friends and your family, who's vaccinated, who's not. It's a lot of stuff that people don't, want to think about, and you're not going to get a straight answer no matter what you try and find. So you have to pull pieces, little pieces, make up your mind about, okay, Is this something I should do? The whole vaccine passport thing, that's not a factor. I wouldn't do it because of that. I think that's going to fall through and is going to be a non-issue. But you got to think about the other risks, and then you got the long hauler risks. So COVID long haulers, that's the thing where people just have these chronic long-term, whether it's chest pains or just shortness of breath, or they have this scarring in their lungs that just doesn't go away. And it can be permanent. I'm not talking about, there's not like, long hauler lasts a month, long hauler lasts 6 months. We don't know that. Long hauler could be permanent. These people could have all these symptoms for the rest of their life. So that's a huge risk for people to not get the vaccine. You say, well, what are the long-term effects of the vaccine? If that's a possibility, long haulers from having COVID, what's the long-term effects of getting the vaccine? Now, there's risks in that too. There's people that are having long-term effects from their own immune response to the vaccine. Joint pains, weird just fogginess, fatigue. Those are probably the more common ones, because it's the immune response that your body's just attacking and still trying to fight off, and that can hit and linger in some people. And we've seen evidence of this stuff on MRIs and joints and the inflammation that just lingers around. So that's real stuff, but they don't really have numbers to I can't give you a specific number on this stuff because that's hard to find. But the risk is there on both sides. So people that say, we don't know what the long-term effects of the vaccine are. It's an emergency standard, only vaccine. If it wasn't an emergency, they wouldn't be able to prove it because there's not enough research. You could say that, yeah, but what research do you have on COVID long-term? Not any either. We're starting to get some long-term because it's been around so long already. We're already like a year and a half here. So we know people can have these long-term effects from COVID, severe effects. So we do know some things, but there's so much stuff we don't know. So don't look at one piece and say, okay, well, we don't know that. Well, you also don't know the opposite. So you can't play the card of we don't know what this really does when you don't actually know what COVID does either. And we do know a lot about COVID now, but there's a lot we don't know. We know there's long-term effects in not a lot of people, but you talk to some of your friends that have had COVID. If they had a severe case of COVID, they're probably still feeling some effects from it months down the road. Do you want to be that person? If you don't get vaccinated, that's a risk. So think about it. I think a lot less risk on the vaccination side. I don't want to have permanent lung scarring. That's a fear of mine. And that's a lot of people that have COVID. People that have mild COVID, and they go and they get a CT scan 6 months later, and their lungs still look bad. Will that go away? Maybe not. The lungs don't heal very well. It's one of the few organs in our body that scarring is generally permanent. So it's a gamble. Either way, I would err on the side of less, which I would say is the vaccine. That's my opinion. But people have the right to make their decision. I just want you guys to have perspectives from both sides to think about. Take home, ponder. If you're one of the in-betweenies, think about it. Ask questions. Ask me questions. I'll talk about it. Y'all have a good day.